Hi, everyone. Brandon Vigliarolo here with the latest episode of the Register's Kettle podcast, and we've got a special one for you this week that, I'll admit, is a bit personal for me. If you've been following the news, you've probably heard about wildfire smoke blanketing the Great Lakes region of the United States, which is where I live. On Thursday morning, I woke to see air quality index scores nearing 1,000 in nearby towns. That's double the AQI scale's maximum of 500, and considered dangerously unhealthy for even fit, young individuals. So what does that have to do with tech, you may ask? Well, there's been rampant wildfires in Canada, the northern US, and the West Coast in recent years that experts say has been made far worse by climate change. And the data center build-out driven by AI demand has led many tech companies to replace sustainability promises with gas turbines belching carbon into the atmosphere. With me to discuss the environmental impacts of data center projects is our editor-in-chief, Matt Rosoff, and a special guest this week, CNBC technology and climate reporter Laura Kolodny, who just authored a report on XAI's role in the data center backlash thanks to what's been going on in Memphis, Tennessee. Laura, Matt, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so
having
much for
us.
having me. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's kind of a reunion with Matt. We used to work together. He's edited many of my past stories on this very issue.
Yeah, it's
Indeed.
nice to have someone so familiar with this and doing so much great reporting on this to come on. So let's start exactly with that report. XAI's Memphis dealings, you just published a video and a written summary of the report on that and how it's having an impact on locals and the local environment. So tell us a bit about what's going on down there, specifically looking at kind of more the environmental side of things.
Big picture, a couple years ago, early 2024, XAI, which was Elon Musk's, AI venture that's now part of SpaceX,
Hmm.
was had moved into Memphis, into this old appliance factory, an Electrolux factory, and was building out a data center kind of at breakneck speed. Like it was popped up in 122 days. He had to move some assets around. I had done a story about this in 2024, but Tesla had ordered like $500 million worth of chips from Nvidia, and
Hmm.
he said, "Oh, XAI needs those sooner," and they just kind of shifted it over. A lot of secrecy around it, where the company was striking land deals under little known subsidiary names. The Memphis Chamber of Commerce was, advocating for this, but not every resident was read in on the process. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden, there's this data center there. And as you probably know from your own experience in Michigan and just reporting on this, these data centers for AI inference and training, uh, they can consume a lot more land, water, power, and equipment than
Oh,
some
yeah.
other data centers for cloud computing. And so this one
Yep.
was massive and it had a massive footprint. And additionally, it needed a lot more power than the local utilities could immediately provide. Right.
Hmm.
So Musk's company did what a lot of other AI data center developers are doing, which is to pop up a bunch of giant natural gas burning or methane gas burning turbines to power it until they could get interconnected to the grid and buy like $1 billion worth of Tesla Megapack battery systems and solar panels to help start powering it. And those gas burning turbines just belch out emissions.
Right.
And the construction of it too is generating a lot of PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5, that is
Yep. Same as
really,
wildfire smoke. Yep.
yes, really damaging. That's the thing that's damaging to respiratory health, right? When you read all
Hmm.
these climate and public health reports, it's PM 2.5 and things like NOx that come from burning natural gas. It's a precursor to ozone formation. So when the
Right.
people of Greater Memphis in and around this community became aware of what was going on, they immediately were like, "What is this? Who authorized this? Why weren't we read in? Why wasn't the public comment period more involved? Why didn't we have more buy-in?" And I mean, it's been drama ever since. And Musk's empire there has sort of been expanding. They have two more data centers in this gigantic power plant in Greater Memphis, just across state lines in Mississippi, in a town called South Haven. And so our documentary little half-hour piece for CNBC, my esteemed colleagues, Janice Pettit-Hines and Andrew Evers, went down and actually we wanted to show people what we've been reporting on for a couple years and meet with residents, how has this affected your life? Can you show us what it's like living near this? And you could just hear this loud whining, humming of the turbines nearby. One guy,
Yeah.
who's part of a class action lawsuit about the public noise nuisance they're alleging was like, it's literally like a form of torture to him. It's just
That
interrupting
was the
his sleep.
guy that was the guy who was by the power plant, correct?
Jason
In the video?
Haley, yeah,
Yeah.
all of them were telling us about these noise levels. One guy we spoke to who didn't wanna go on camera, said, like, "I don't mind it, but I'd like to sell my property to XAI." And
Mhm.
it's just sort of
Yeah. How
it's
how loud is it? What does it sound like?
it sounds like living near an airport, like, right next door to an airport, like jet
Mm.
engines, very loud.
Well,
There
yeah,
were
and
professional.
Jason's video, I think, or the video portion where he was in, there were a lot of clips, from him with a sound meter, and it was, like, in the mid-70s of decibel. Like, that's loud. I mean, I
Yeah.
think 80 is when OSHA basically says you need to be worried about hearing damage.
Yeah, and noise can be variable, right? Because
Mhm.
you need more and less power, right? AI workloads are variable, and that's one thing that's challenging for the grid and off-grid power supply. It's not like the steadiness of other industrial uses of that kind of power. So the noise levels can vary based on how many turbines have to be fired up and running all
Right.
the time, and cooling towers and other things. Um, and I didn't mention this, but one thing Musk's company had promised, the sort of council members in leadership positions in Memphis was like, "We'll also help Memphis Light, Gas, and Water build out this gray water recycling plant, like water recycling facility,
Mhm.
and that way we won't put as much stress on the water demands nearby the water tables." And
And that's
they
pretty much
haven't built
stalled,
it.
right?
They
Yeah.
haven't built it. It's stalled out. It didn't come online with their first data center or the new data centers that are underway. And there are questions now in the community about, can you even enforce this? Or are we just kind of waiting for Musk to come through with this promise? Because he he's like sort of the king of like making these big promises and then coming through with like, some really really good stuff on one front, but maybe not over here, and leaving people. I mean, the state of New York with Tesla had to like write down $1 billion on a project where Musk was taking over a solar factory and then ended up using it for like AI data infrastructure, making like charging network equipment, but not the solar panels they promised to produce there. And just didn't create the high tech clean energy jobs that were promised. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a whole Muskoverse. It's very complicated. But
Yeah.
what about in Michigan? I mean, Michigan has so many data centers. What is it like, reporting on this and living there amid.
Well, I mean, luckily, I'm pretty isolated, right? I'm way up in northern Michigan, in a very rural area, but most of the data centers that are going in are all downstate, right? And one of the things that's interesting is, northern Michigan is surprisingly underdeveloped in terms of large scale infrastructure. In the northern part of the state, like I think it's 350 volts, the larger power lines that oftentimes feed into these larger facilities, they terminate in a town called Gaylord, and they don't really fan out across the upper part of the state. So anyone who would try to build a data center up here would have a lot of infrastructure needs to address, unless they were going to build on-site power, which I think a lot of people up here, at least from things that I've been hearing, are not they're not thrilled with the idea of on-site power generation at local data centers. But there's not a lot up here. They're all mostly downstate. I mean, there are some edge facilities, right? Like internet service providers still have to have their local data centers and things, right? But that's, I think, not the kind that people are concerned about. It's your colo facilities and your hyperscalers that are really driving most of this worry.
Yeah, and I
The
think one thing that I've kind of realized is how massive these data centers are and how much bigger they are. I mean, we've been talking about this for 20, 30 years now.
Yeah.
Microsoft was building them
Yep.
out in rural Washington state, I think 25 years ago. These things are, I think Colossus is like a gigawatt, is that right? Something like that. It used to be a big one would maybe be 50 or 100 megawatts, like a huge one was
Hmm.
100 megawatts. Now these are standard, they're talking 2 gigawatts in Texas, and I think, Meta is building one in Louisiana that's gonna be 2 to 4, like, just absolutely massive facilities. So they take a lot more power, they make a lot more noise, they run a lot hotter, and so forth.
Yeah, how many? So I think you're in your report, Laura. Someone said that, or maybe it was the narrator who mentioned the number of turbines, right? Like a power plant using these similar turbines would have like 4 or 5, maybe 6.
That
How
was
many?
that was
Yeah.
a climate specialized attorney with the group
Okay.
that is suing XAI, SpaceX AI, on behalf of the NAACP,
Hmm.
because these developments have been in historically and majority Black and lower wealth neighborhoods around Memphis. This is very important to NACP from an environmental justice perspective. And they're suing and saying, like, you didn't go through the Clean Air Act permitting process.
Right.
Uh, the public records have shown that they're using anywhere up to 59 turbines when they said they would be using far fewer. And it's like, again, the number that are operational at a time, it can vary.
Yeah.
And like there are questions of oversight. You guys just reported on this in another, mega big tech company with Amazon, but there are questions about like who's overseeing this? How accurate are the stats? The company promises this, they do that. Um, the you know, they are using, like I said, up to 59 turbines, and these things are big. These aren't like little
Yeah.
roadside things like, you see an emergency for, helping keep the traffic lights on or something. They're like
These are power plant scale turbines, right? I mean,
y
essentially.
yeah,
And
and,
I know I think in the report you were mentioning there was sometimes that, like, thermal cameras had shown there were 30 plus running at once. I mean,
yeah,
that is a lot of power.
that was
And
that was over in the one closer to Memphis, and the South
right.
Haven one is on, like, a decommissioned power plant site
Mhm.
where SpaceX is gonna be building out a permanent power plant site that will also be run on natural gas, which is
Yeah,
so
I wrote not
crazy,
it
like
is. There were a few years ago, I remember writing about maybe 2023, 2024 about all Google, Amazon, all the big hyperscalers were talking about all these nuclear deals they were making. Oh, we're gonna be, incorporating next gen nuclear and all this clean energy and stuff. Well, surprise, surprise, just like we were saying back then, small modular reactors are still, perpetually a few years off like they have been, like fusion and everything else. They're always coming soon. And in the meantime, right, because they can't rely on this kind of power, in the meantime, they're building all these gas turbines. Microsoft just signed a deal in Texas, I think, that included a 20-year deal. I wrote about this. I'm trying to remember specifics. A 20-year deal in Texas to build a data center that was going to be entirely powered by gas turbines, with no real mention in the literature anywhere of, oh yeah, we're eventually going to get this connected to the grid and try to go green. It was basically just an admission that hey, yeah, this is going to be a massive permanent gas turbine project.
and I mean,
R
Elon Musk got famous by being like the green industrialist, this
Right.
like is a climate savior, but here he is building out natural gas burning power plants, um,
and I
it's
yeah, I
very
remember just
revealing.
a couple years ago, we wrote something on Meta doing the same thing. They'd made this big announcement about how they're going to use nuclear power, and then the very
Yeah,
next day they
2
said,
days
"Oh, but we're
later.
building this
Yep.
2 gigawatt facility in Louisiana that will be entirely gas powered." I just
Yeah, I
think it's
wrote that because I was
astounding.
like, "This is 2 days later, and you guys are
Yeah,
turning right around and saying you're building this gas turbine plant right after making this huge green energy promise."
yeah. I
Well,
just think it's astounding how fast the big tech companies have retreated from these environmental commitments that they were supposedly touting a few years ago. I mean, if you remember, the basketball hockey stadium in Seattle is now called Climate Change Arena because Amazon bought the rights to it, and that's what they decided to call it, or Climate something Arena. Anyway, um, they basically run full speed in the other direction, and AI is too important, and we absolutely can't, afford to lose on this. You've got Doug Burgum, who's the
Oh,
Secretary of
yeah.
the Interior now, former Microsoft executive, sold a software company called Great Plains to Microsoft way back in the early 2000s, and then he was the governor of North Dakota. He's basically saying, forget about the climate. We can't lose AI to China. We
Yeah.
absolutely have to
Eh,
do whatever it takes to win this race, no matter what. And that's the tone that's being set. And it's just
yeah,
kind of
Eric
astounding to
Schmidt
me how fast everybody's sort of retreated from these ideas that were so important. I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, Eric Schmidt said in 2024 that he was confident we were not gonna meet climate goals, so we should just build more AI data centers because, again, we've gotta win at this, and it's more important than preserving, the planet for us and our descendants. It's kinda shocking. It's like 2025, I think. I wrote earlier this year that 2025, was it tripled, there was a tripling of gas power demand in the United States in 2025, and it was driven
Right.
in large part by data centers. Um, I think from someone I spoke to for the story, they told me that there was gonna be the equivalent of 12.1 billion tons of emissions from new gas power plants being built as of 2025 over the lifetime. That's a long-term figure, but it's not really encouraging, you know,
Yeah.
especially with
But I mean,
XAI, right? If they're running more than they're saying they're running, then can we even rely on that number?
well, I wanna say something that's on the optimistic side because it can get very depressing up here in the tech climate beat.
Like,
Um,
yeah.
Which is well, policy is business in a sense, and we have a federal government that has more of a deregulatory and pro-business attitude that is, really eschewing, like, the biggest externality there is in business, which is climate change. You know?
Mhm.
It's like they're
What's
I don't
that?
know, it's a little disconnected. But
Yeah.
but so part of it is just companies blowing whichever way the wind blows, like or flowing whichever way the wind blows because their values always prove to be flexible, right? And then
Right.
part of it is like, well, when it's cost effective as it is, like with all this demand for the turbines and for natural gas, those prices are soaring. So that's not good for margins. And then sometimes you see, like you were talking about Eric Schmidt. Well,
Mhm.
Google is, in Minnesota, they're doing a deal with Xcel Energy, and I forget who else is involved, but, like, they've agreed to power a couple of Google data centers in and around Minnesota with, like, an electric service agreement that's supposed to fund, like, a boatload, like, almost 2,000 megawatts of new renewable energy in the state and a big iron air battery for energy
Mhm.
storage, which is good for volatility and can make greater use of the renewables, and, like, a lot of this stuff is gonna emerge from local municipal regulation and also deals as people become more aware of the impacts and the energy demands, and that's partly because it's now a political issue, right?
Right.
These
Yeah.
folks, we learned this in interviewing, um, all manner of experts around what happened in Memphis. Memphis has become like a cautionary tale, right? Not
Mm.
everyone can build a
Mhm.
data center like Musk. They don't have the resources or the, attitude. But yeah, it's like a cautionary tale, and it's helping activists, like, figure out what to demand, what to negotiate for. You had Governor Kathy Hochul in New York, like, kind of draw the ire of Trump this week by putting a one-year moratorium. A one-year delay is not that big a deal, but,
No.
Yeah.
like, let's
There's a
figure
lot
this
of
out.
work to do in that 1 year. That's where I mean, we were talking earlier, in my neck of the woods, I'm on a township commission working on fleshing out zoning laws for data centers, essentially to prevent them being built up here because no one in the township wants, a massive hyperscaler in this rural location. Not that we're a good site for one, but we have to move fast. We've got less than a year left in this moratorium. It's a lot of work to do in the course of a year to figure those kinds of things out.
Can I ask why don't you want them? Is it like, we want it only if, there's water recycling and we are assured of these property taxes? Like, would you be cool with the data centers there? Because that's what we heard in Memphis over and over. Um, Boxtown, South Haven, Whitehaven, the places most impacted by
Mhm.
Elon's projects were like, you know what? We needed buy-in. We needed guarantees about this. This could have been good. And we're like,
Yeah,
really?
so the attitude amongst the public here, right? And I'm going to exclude myself from this only because I'm part of the group who's working on these regulations. But the public that we've spoken to, by and large, we are, not to identify myself too closely into where I live, but we're in a very rural coastal, coast of Michigan, Lake Michigan region, and we're very, very protective of our natural resources and the beauty of the area, the tourist vibe, the woods, the trails, the hiking, everything. And so I think most people are just like, we don't want even the possibility that that could disrupt the local atmosphere at all. Where I live has also been fairly, resistant to a lot of development and change of any kind. And I think that being such a hot political issue right now, right, is
Yeah.
just it's the thing of the moment, right? There was a huge to do a few years ago about solar regulations in the township and other things. So it's you know we're considering measures that would make it restrictive, right, for people to build here. Like you can if you want to meet all these requirements, but if anyone actually wants to build here, they're going to have to be doing some very specific things, like closed loop water, and making sure that light pollution is minimalized, making sure that there's no noise. 50. They said I think we've been talking about a 50 decibel limit 60 feet off the property, right? So that's
Mm.
it's very restrictive,
But,
which would
the water thing is so tough because And I know NVIDIA recently developed a chip they were touting as requiring less cooling,
Hmm.
but evaporative cooling requires less electricity,
Right.
and recycled water, might require more power. And these
Yeah.
companies are
And more
just
noise. Yeah.
yeah, they're just dealing with so many complexities, and for all their complexities, then the data center's built, and, you don't need to hire that many people to operate it.
Right.
Right, I think that's the thing with these large scale development projects, there's usually some sort of bargain. Well, at least they're gonna be good for the local economy, they'll create jobs and that kinda thing. Like, you think about when Amazon was talking about, EC2, their second headquarters, and where they were gonna base that, the promise as well, at least employ tens of thousands of people. Once these
For a
things are built,
while.
not that many people work in them. Yeah,
Yeah.
the data centers don't provide a lot of employment. And then the other thing is I think a lot of the sort of grassroots protests that we're seeing go back to the fact that many people do not understand what benefits AI in general is going to bring to them and to their community. You hear the fear
Yeah.
of, oh, it's going to take your job and it's going to make everything harder for everybody, but we're going to build it anyway. And I think people have a right to wonder, well, what is this going to do for me and why am I not on board with it?
Right. Well, and even businesses, like from the individual consumer, obviously, I think a lot of people view AI as just this meme and fake photos machine, right? It just outputs slop that floods the internet, and it doesn't do anything good. But, if you think about it from the business perspective, even then, right? I don't know when the most recent piece we've written, but it's not hard to find stories online about return on investment for AI just not panning out for most businesses that are using it. I feel like
Yeah.
it's being pushed regardless of the fact that use cases haven't really materialized.
I mean,
Right.
I think
There are some things it's
collect
very good at and some things not, and we haven't figured
Sure.
out yet what works and what doesn't, I think.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think also it's very telling that, the AI industry boasts about their data centers by how many gigawatts they consume. There's
Right.
no instinct towards efficiency until they're like, "Oh, no, the tokens are costing us a lot." They think about
Yeah.
efficiency in terms of dollars, not environmental footprint, not the longer term impact and how that can harm. I mean, I remember reading in videos annual shareholders communications, and they had multiple points in their annual report where they talk about climate change risk, extreme weather risk, and what it can do to data center development, which is driving the growth of purchases of their products. But then they advise shareholders to vote against scope 3 emissions reporting.
Right.
Like, just
Scope
Right.
3 for people who aren't familiar is from, it's like it's like suppliers and things, right? It's
Supply
external
chain.
scope, right?
Right.
Yeah, supply
yeah.
chain.
Or I think in that context, and correct me if I'm wrong, or go look this up after the episode, but I think it could also account for once we sell the GPUs, what are the emissions generated in our customers' use of our equipment,
Right,
of our
right. I
cutting
think so,
edge
yeah.
chips, and it's just it's so mercenary and actuarial. It's all about the dollar amounts. So to deal with these companies and get them to be more climate minded, I think you have to deal with the dollar amounts when policy isn't a lever, when federal policy isn't a lever, and this is a deregulatory Trump administration,
Yeah,
so
Right.
so I mean, but I guess that kind of begs the question of, if, for example, let's say that we get a incredibly progressive, environmentally conscious Democrat or independent in office in the next election cycle, right? These build outs have already begun. XAI already has this massive, 50 turbine power plant in Mississippi for its Memphis operation. Like, what?
59. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How far can that swing back? You know, uh,
I think probably what you'd end up seeing is what Laura was alluding to before is, prices increase for natural gas,
mhm,
other alternative forms of energy that by chance happen to also be cleaner will become cheaper. And if you have government subsidies that can sort of tip things over one way or the other, that might end up happening. So you'll have, more local solar. I remember when Apple was doing a lot of data center build outs and they sort of had their own dedicated solar facility down in
mhm.
Monterey. And so there are other ways to power these things. It's just right now, it all seems to be build as fast as we can. This is a potentially massive market that could replace huge sectors of the economy. At least that's what a lot of the financiers and a lot of the big tech companies believe is going to happen. So it doesn't matter. Race as fast as you can, and we'll figure all this other stuff out later. So maybe at some
Yeah.
point, as these things are partly built, we'll start to see them be powered by different kinds of energy.
There's also grid utilization, just making more of what we have with the transmission lines and the sources we have. I've seen some interesting climate tech startups tackling this, but it's something that's amazing to me is when you had in Memphis, like, an Electrolux factory that's, like, making appliances, everyone can see it,
Mhm.
and what is being made in the AI factory, it's like defense tech systems. So an interesting thing that happened with Memphis and XAI is after the NAACP filed a suit in a federal court in the Northern District of Mississippi, um, the DOJ stepped in. You know, Musk is a great ally of Trump, right? He helped propel him back into office. And you've got the DOJ and the Department of Defense, to which Musk is a key supplier, prime contractor
Mhm.
with SpaceX, stepping in and saying the NAACP suit threatens national security. Citizens asking to enforce the Cleaner Act is somehow threatening national security because XAI's Grok, like the military version of it, was used in our military operations in Iran.
Hmm.
And we are using XAI stuff for national security. So they've intervened. They've filed a
I
motion to
did
intervene, I mean, and they're
Yeah.
asking
I
to
didn't
toss the
realize
law.
anybody was using Grok. I guess I'm ignorant of that.
Um,
The only
it's
people I
it's
know
the
who are
number
using
one
it
app.
are tech bros. Yeah.
Is it, yeah, it's the number one app for people who want to generate a certain kind of non-consensual imagery.
Right,
Uh,
right.
That
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
I can't
yeah.
see
correct.
that it's
Yeah, I had someone demo that to me in real time in a bar not too long ago. So yeah.
as a selling point, like, that doesn't
No,
exactly say, "Hey,
no,
check
just a
this out."
bro. He was making a joke and he showed me on the phone, here's an imaginary video with you and a person who doesn't exist. And I was like, "Whoa, dude, what are you doing? How are you doing this?" He's like, "It's Grok." I'm like, "Of course it is."
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there are so many, municipal and state level things that are getting done right now because that federal, um, kind of like motivation to enforce Cleaner Act has, like, gone away, and corporations have just been like, "Oh, you're not messing with that? We could just build fast, get ahead, see what we can get away with." And, like, I'm watching all of that stuff, like, from Olive Branch and Jackson that responded directly to Memphis, like, changing some zoning laws so
Mhm.
they can close loopholes that have allowed Musk to build out faster, um, nearby, to, like, these state level things I mentioned in New York, the moratorium, and then there's Ohio took away some tax breaks for data center developers, and, um, there was something in New Jersey with, the governor there, Mickey Sherrill, signed a, like, kind of a set of legislation, into law about a week back where she was like, "Hey, data centers have to, like, actually pay for all the support on the grid that's needed to power them. We're not passing this on to residents and businesses here."
Right.
Like, so that's all it's all getting worked out, and it's really interesting to see it, come down to the local level, the municipal level, since the federal level's not dealing with it.
Yeah, and there certainly seems to be a lot of grassroots organization against these things. Even in a relative family lives in sort of a rural community in eastern Tennessee, and just the rumor of the possibility of a data center being built in the area was enough to get people out at the city council meeting, creating protests, and the town government actually they had to come and say, "No, we don't have anything happening. We have nothing that's actually going on here." They could have been lying, but that was the thought. But this is a place that in recent years, if you go back a generation, it was a paper mill, and then that's been replaced by an Amazon fulfillment center. And so then this is kind of the next step. At least the Amazon
Mhm.
fulfillment center employs local people. These data centers don't do a lot for the local
Not
economies.
Not after
Yeah.
construction, right? Or they
No.
might be able to, but I think that's something I'm very interested in is, like, do you understand the AI factory next door and what they make? Like, are you proud of
Mhm.
Yeah.
it? You know, I don't think enough of us tech reporters are asking people that live next door if they understand what the AI factory is making and how they feel about it. Um, but the yeah, I mean, I do think we need data centers at this next frontier of, like, think about all the good robotics can do just environmentally, right? Like, autonomous boats that, like, take oceanographic measurements or push garbage out of the way, like, I mean, have been interesting to me, and um there's so much in robotics that's tied to AI, and that's, like, my jam, but I I also think about all the developers that we interview who are finding much more value in AI than we might through
Mhm.
chatbots or, like just the
Sure.
next
Yeah.
the next era of search. It's like, what is this? Or AI image generation. I don't need that because I can do the art or work with a graphic artist. We don't need AI assistance with our writing if we're writers. But
Hmm.
like if we need these data centers, you hope they're connected to the grid and fund a more efficient, more powerful grid and don't put a bunch of pollution out there or use, so much water it's endangering our water table. But
Yeah.
it's quandary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what one of the things that was said at the end of your essay, your video, was basically there's a way to do this right. It just seems like the problem is that's right is kind of being given way too quick, right? Because the demand is right here and it's right now. And in exchange, we're, belching more carbon into the atmosphere, which is causing worse wildfire seasons, which is forcing me to close my windows and lock my doors when I don't have air conditioning.
It's devastating. I'm based in San Francisco, and of course, we had the famous Orange Sky Day that sort of woke
Hmm.
up the US to how that works here, and not just near areas where there's, like, a lot of logging, but, big cities.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and then I was in New York City this week, back east visiting family briefly, and, it was oppressive. It was so hazy you couldn't see the skyline normally, and this is from the, Canada fires that you're also, um,
Yeah.
getting this from, but it's people, I think, have a tendency to not take these climate issues seriously unless we can, like, translate it into how this literally affects your life, hits your wallet, and hits your business bottom line, and it's like, I know it sounds gauche because it's so much more important than just dollars, but if you can communicate some of it in dollars, it gets through to people differently. Like if you want to talk to the right about like renewable energy, it's about energy independence and dominance, right? Or the
Right. Right.
cost of energy needed in the United States in our business world. If you want to talk on the left, it's like biodiversity, and the
Mhm.
spotted tree owl or whatever. More like holistic environmental considerations,
Yeah.
ecological considerations. And I love
Hmm.
all those things. Like,
Yeah.
let's talk about
Right.
climate on all those points, but um it's so it's just
Yeah.
it's such an inflection point.
Yeah.
Right, and with the AI boom, I mean, again, it's this financial imbalance where there's going to be huge opportunity in it. We don't know exactly quite what it's gonna look like, but let's just run as fast as we can now while the financing is there and everything. The tokens are subsidized and so forth. So it'll all shake out, I think, over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
But
Let's hope it shakes out for the better, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's always the possibility that the bubble could pop before then and we could have some great rebalancing of all this, but we'll see. We'll see. And we'll be here to cover it all on the kettle. Laura, thanks again so much for joining us. Matt, thanks for clearing the time on your busy, busy schedule to come on. And
All right.
we will talk to you all very soon.